In the heart of London's elite social circle lived a couple who seemed to have everything. Jonathan Whitmore, a billionaire real estate magnate, and his elegant wife, Evelyn, were the epitome of success, wealth, and glamour. Their every public appearance was marked by luxury, exclusive galas, private jets, designer wardrobes, and front-row seats at every major fashion event. Tabloids adored them, calling them the golden couple of Mayfair. Their sprawling estate just outside the city was featured in lifestyle magazines, while Jonathan's face often graced the covers of financial publications. To the outside world, they were a power couple, untouchable and enviable. Their love story, often told in glowing headlines, began during Evelyn's final year at Oxford, where she met Jonathan at a charity fundraiser. Despite the difference in their worlds, Evelyn coming from a modest but proud academic family and Jonathan being the heir to a vast fortune, their chemistry was undeniable. Evelyn, graceful and intelligent, had once dreamed of becoming a professor. But love redirected her path, and she embraced life as the partner of one of England's most influential men. She poured her energy into their home, their social responsibilities, and most recently, into preparing for the arrival of their first child. Evelyn's pregnancy was a long-awaited joy for her. She attended birthing classes alone, curated the nursery herself, and dreamt of the little milestones they would share as a family: first steps, bedtime stories, Sunday strolls through Hyde Park. But despite her devotion, something had shifted between them. There were subtle signs: Jonathan's increasing absences, his distracted conversations, the way he glanced at his phone too often. Evelyn noticed but chose to suppress her doubts. She still believed in the man she married. What she didn't know was that Jonathan had been planning a private getaway with another woman, a younger, glamorous socialite named Cassandra Lee. Under the guise of a business retreat, Jonathan boarded a jet to the French Riviera, leaving Evelyn behind at a critical moment in her pregnancy. While he sipped champagne aboard a luxury yacht, Evelyn's water broke on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Alone in their massive estate, clutching her belly in pain and fear, Evelyn realized she had no one to rely on. As she called for a car to take her to the hospital, a storm raged outside, and within her. The perfect life she had clung to was unraveling, and the most important moment of her life was beginning in the loneliest way possible. Jonathan Whitmore had grown accustomed to living life on his terms. The empire he'd built from his father's inheritance gave him a sense of invincibility, and the pressures of corporate meetings, board decisions, and high-stakes investments had always provided the perfect excuse to disappear when personal responsibilities became too inconvenient. The impending birth of his child should have been grounding, even humbling, but instead, it made him restless. He told Evelyn he had an urgent investor summit in Monaco, something she barely questioned because she had learned over time not to stand in the way of business. In truth, Jonathan wasn't heading to any summit. He was jetting off to a secluded villa in the south of France with Cassandra Lee, a rising star in the fashion world known for her sharp beauty and even sharper ambitions. Their affair had begun months earlier, igniting after a coincidental meeting at an art gallery in Milan. Jonathan was captivated by her wit, her confidence, and her unfiltered way of saying things Evelyn would never dare to say. Cassandra, on the other hand, was drawn to Jonathan's power, his presence, and the intoxicating lifestyle he could offer. She didn't ask about his wife unless it served her need to feel superior. She knew about the baby and pretended it didn't bother her, but in truth, it thrilled her to believe she could steal a billionaire from beneath the roof of a pregnant woman. Their vacation was a carefully curated fantasy. Mornings spent lounging on a private yacht, afternoons exploring hidden coves, and nights filled with expensive wine, silk sheets, and whispered promises neither fully meant. Every photo taken was deliberately hidden, every staff member sworn to secrecy. Jonathan didn't speak of Evelyn much, but when he did, it was with a tinge of frustration about how emotionally distant she'd become, how demanding the pregnancy was, how much she'd changed. Cassandra listened, indulged, and never challenged his version of the truth. Meanwhile, back home in London, Evelyn sat alone in the nursery she'd decorated by hand. The crib was ready, the tiny clothes folded neatly, and every detail prepared with loving care. Yet the absence of her husband grew heavier by the day. She tried not to let her mind wander, tried to believe he was just overwhelmed with business. But the calls were less frequent, the texts more superficial. She lay awake at night, one hand on her belly, trying to ignore the ache in her heart that was louder than the silence around her. While Jonathan lay beside Cassandra under a blanket of stars on a Mediterranean balcony, sipping champagne and feeding her promises he didn't yet understand, guilt crept into his mind like an uninvited guest. He felt it in fleeting moments, when he watched her laugh, when he saw his phone light up with Evelyn's name, when the reality of what he'd abandoned momentarily pierced his bubble. Still, desire was louder than conscience. He buried his guilt beneath luxury and seduction, believing he could handle the consequences later. But some choices, once made, rewrite the story in ways no one can undo. It began with a sharp cramp low in Evelyn's abdomen, something she initially brushed off as another round of Braxton Hicks contractions. She was only 37 weeks along, and her doctor had assured her she had time. But when the second wave hit, stronger and longer, she knew this wasn't a drill. Her hand instinctively flew to her belly as she stood in the middle of the nursery, the mobile above the crib still spinning slowly from where she had just finished adjusting it. The reality sank in fast. She was going into labor, and she was completely alone. The house, a vast estate with 10 bedrooms and marble floors that echoed with silence, suddenly felt cavernous and cold. She reached for her phone, dialed Jonathan first, then again. No answer. His assistant said he was unreachable due to important negotiations. Evelyn didn't have the luxury of time to scream or cry. The contractions came quickly, and with every breath, she felt a tightening panic building alongside the pain. She dialed a car service and paced the front hallway, clutching her hospital bag with one hand and her lower back with the other. No family came to her side. Her parents had passed away years ago, and though Jonathan's family was prominent, they had always kept her at arm's length. Her two closest friends were out of the country, and her emergency contact list felt like a cruel joke. As she sat in the back seat of the luxury car, doubled over and gripping the door handle with white knuckles, flashes of her life with Jonathan surged through her mind. She remembered their early days, his spontaneous proposal in Rome, how he once drove 6 hours just to see her for dinner, the way he looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. Those memories felt like dreams now, flickers of a life that had quietly slipped away while she tried to hold on. The silence in the car was deafening. Every bump in the road intensified her pain, but worse than the physical agony was the emotional one, the crushing realization that the man she had trusted, the man whose child she was carrying, had chosen to be somewhere else. There was no hand to hold, no voice to calm her, no partner to lean on. Just her and the baby, moving forward through the pain and fear together. At the hospital, nurses rushed to her side, immediately recognizing the urgency of her condition. Though the staff was kind and professional, there was no hiding the glances of pity, no masking the awkward silence when they asked who would be joining her in the delivery room, and she answered, no one. Still, Evelyn didn't cry. She clenched her jaw, breathed through each contraction, and stared at the ceiling tiles as if they held the strength she needed. She asked the doctor direct questions, signed forms with unwavering hands, and reminded herself that she could do this. That she had to. In those brutal, lonely hours, Evelyn discovered a strength she never knew she had. Every push, every scream, every second of raw vulnerability etched itself into her soul, not as a symbol of her suffering, but of her resilience. She wasn't just delivering a baby. She was delivering herself into a new reality, one that no longer included illusions of fairy tale marriages or loyal husbands. And as the delivery room filled with the sound of her baby's first cry, Evelyn gripped the edge of the bed, her body trembling, her face streaked with sweat and silent tears. In that moment, she wasn't abandoned. She was reborn. Cassandra Lee reclined on the sun-drenched terrace of the French villa, her sunglasses shielding her eyes from the Mediterranean glare as she lazily scrolled through her phone. Jonathan had gone inside to take a call, supposedly about a development project in Dubai, but Cassandra knew better. The slight tension in his voice, the fact that he stepped away when he spoke to certain people, told her everything she needed to know. He was still tethered to his wife. And now, as the date of Evelyn's due date approached, that tether was fraying at the edges. Cassandra wasn't naive. She knew what she was doing when she first flirted with Jonathan at the Milan art event. She knew he was married. She knew his wife was pregnant. But none of that had stopped her, because she had spent her entire adult life watching women like Evelyn win by playing the quiet, polished, devoted role. Cassandra was done playing second to anyone. With her long legs, glossy hair, and sharp intuition, she had always turned heads, and she wasn't going to waste her youth hoping for a man to choose her. She would make herself irreplaceable. But the closer the baby's arrival came, the more Cassandra found herself oscillating between smug satisfaction and uncomfortable insecurity. Sometimes she imagined Jonathan leaving Evelyn for good, replacing the wife and child with her, choosing adventure and desire over obligation. In those moments, Cassandra fantasized about stepping into the spotlight as the new Mrs. Whitmore, redefining the title, becoming the center of his world, not an afterthought hidden behind business trips and hushed phone calls. She wanted the power, the recognition, and the security that came with the Whitmore name. Yet at other times, especially in the quiet early mornings when Jonathan looked out at the sea with a faraway expression, guilt crept in. Guilt that she had become a wedge in someone else's marriage. Guilt that a child was about to be born while the father lounged half-naked beside her. But Cassandra quickly smothered those feelings, telling herself that Evelyn had already lost him long ago, that she was merely the symptom, not the cause. Evelyn, in her mind, had grown cold, too absorbed in motherhood, too boring, too predictable. Cassandra offered Jonathan something fresh, wild, and exhilarating. She told herself this over and over until it became a belief she could wear like perfume. She had expectations now, though she tried not to admit them aloud. She imagined Jonathan staying with her after the baby was born, cutting ties with Evelyn, perhaps offering her a discreet settlement while starting anew with someone who understood his world better. Cassandra even envisioned herself raising a child someday, maybe not Evelyn's, but her own, with Jonathan by her side. But beneath all that ambition, a quiet question echoed in her mind: if he could leave his pregnant wife, what made her think he wouldn't leave her one day too? Still, she pushed the thought away. For now, she had him. For now, she was winning. Or at least, she thought she was. Jonathan was lounging beside the infinity pool, a glass of bourbon in hand, when his phone buzzed for the 5th time in 10 minutes. He glanced at it lazily, expecting another update from his office or perhaps a message from his driver. Instead, it was his assistant, Melissa, marked urgent. He hesitated, brows furrowing, and then finally swiped to answer. Her voice came through, breathless and strained. "Sir, Evelyn's in labor. She's already at St. James Hospital, alone." For a brief moment, the world around him fell silent. The sound of the waves, Cassandra's laughter from inside, the distant music, they all faded into the background. He sat upright, heart pounding against his ribs, as 1,000 thoughts slammed into him all at once. He hadn't expected it to happen so soon. He thought he had more time to enjoy this escape, to deal with Evelyn later, to sort out his tangled emotions when it was convenient. But reality had arrived, and it wasn't waiting for him to be ready. The glass slipped slightly in his hand, leaving a wet print on his palm as he stood. He walked to the edge of the pool and stared out at the horizon, his mind flashing back to the day Evelyn told him she was pregnant. She had cried, tears of joy, and he remembered pulling her close, burying his face in her hair, telling her it was everything he had ever wanted. In that moment, he believed it. They had even picked out names together. He remembered the first ultrasound, the way Evelyn clutched his hand as their baby's heartbeat pulsed through the speakers. There was a time when the pregnancy wasn't just an obligation, it was a promise of something better. So when had he begun to drift? Why did he now feel so far from the man who once kissed Evelyn's belly and whispered to the child growing inside? Inside the villa, Cassandra was calling his name. He turned slowly, her silhouette framed by the glass doors, her face full of expectation. He could see the question in her eyes. Would he stay or would he go? His chest tightened with conflict. With Cassandra, he felt alive, untouchable. She demanded nothing and offered endless admiration. But back home, a woman was bringing his child into the world without him. A woman who had trusted him, built a life with him, and was now facing the most vulnerable moment of her life alone. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. "I have to leave," he said simply. Cassandra froze, her expression unreadable. "Evelyn's in labor." The room went still. She didn't plead or argue, perhaps because she knew she was only ever part of the story, not the center of it. Jonathan didn't wait for a reply. He was already moving, dialing the pilot, demanding the jet be ready within the hour. As the plane lifted into the clouds, his fingers gripped the armrest tightly. It was too late to undo the past. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to be the man he was supposed to be. Evelyn's screams echoed down the sterile hallway of the maternity ward, raw and unrelenting. Her body convulsed with each contraction, the pain building like a tidal wave, crashing through her with unforgiving force. She was soaked in sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead, her hands clenched so tightly around the bed rails that her knuckles turned white. The hospital lights above her buzzed faintly, indifferent to her agony, and the room spun in and out of focus. A nurse gently wiped her brow, offering whispered reassurances, but Evelyn could hardly hear her. Every ounce of her energy was focused on surviving the moment, on pushing through the hurt, the fear, the sheer loneliness that wrapped around her like a noose. "Where's the father?" a younger nurse asked quietly as they prepared another round of equipment. The charge nurse responded in a hushed tone, "She's alone." Evelyn didn't need to hear them to know what they were saying. The absence of Jonathan, his empty promise to be there, to hold her hand and see their child into the world, was louder than the machines beeping around her. He wasn't coming. She had known it somewhere deep down, even before the doctor confirmed she was fully dilated, even before she was wheeled into the delivery room under harsh fluorescent lights. As the labor progressed, complications began to surface. The baby's heart rate was erratic, dipping dangerously low before climbing again, only to dip once more. Evelyn heard the word distress uttered by the doctor, and suddenly the room grew tighter, tenser. Monitors beeped rapidly. More staff entered. The doctor leaned close to her, explaining the baby was not positioned correctly. There was a chance they'd need to perform an emergency C-section if things didn't progress. Evelyn nodded, barely processing the words. Panic clawed at her throat. She gritted her teeth, whispering to herself that she had to be strong. She was all this child had. If she broke, everything broke with her. Then came the push. The first, the second, the third. Hours blurred into seconds, and every scream ripped something new from within her. It felt eternal. The strain on her body was unbearable, her limbs shaking uncontrollably, but she didn't stop. She wouldn't. Just as the doctor called for the surgical team, something shifted. The baby moved. The nurse shouted, "I see the head." The room burst into action again, this time with a glimmer of hope. And then, silence. A cry. Sharp, loud, and beautiful. Evelyn collapsed back against the bed, her body trembling. She turned her head slightly and saw the doctor holding a wriggling baby girl, her skin pink and covered in vernix, her tiny arms flailing as her cries filled the room. The doctor smiled and said, "You did it. She's perfect." Evelyn's tears fell freely now, not from pain, but from a tidal wave of emotion that overwhelmed her, relief, pride, sorrow, and fierce love. They placed the baby against her chest. Evelyn stared at her daughter, speechless, as the child nestled against her heartbeat. She was so small, yet so powerful, already changing the entire course of Evelyn's life just by being. "Hi," she whispered shakily. "Hi, baby girl. It's just you and me now." Her arms wrapped protectively around the newborn, and for the first time in hours, she felt something close to peace. It was nearly an hour later when the door burst open and Jonathan finally appeared, breathless and disheveled. His suit was wrinkled from the jet, his face pale and anxious. He looked at the scene before him, Evelyn weak but alive, their daughter cradled in her arms, and froze. The nurses stiffened slightly, uncertain of how to react, but Evelyn didn't look at him. She didn't speak. She simply held their daughter closer, her expression unreadable, exhausted beyond explanation. Jonathan stepped forward, reaching out as if to touch the baby, but Evelyn shifted slightly away without a word. The message was clear. He had missed the moment. The one moment that couldn't be bought or rescheduled or salvaged with flowers or apologies. The doctor cleared his throat, breaking the silence, and began explaining the complications they had faced, the close calls. Jonathan nodded numbly, trying to process the fact that everything had happened without him. He had run toward the birth, but arrived only for the aftermath. And Evelyn, though she said nothing, understood in that moment that something fundamental had changed. She had given birth not just to her daughter, but to a new version of herself. One who didn't need Jonathan's presence to be whole. One who had already survived the worst without him. Jonathan stepped out of the hospital elevator with the speed of a man desperate to reverse time. His polished dress shoes clicked sharply against the tile floor, drawing attention from nurses and visitors alike. Security had barely cleared the path before he was storming down the maternity ward's corridor, the bouquet in his hand forgotten, wilting, a mere prop in a scene he was already too late to perform. The door to Evelyn's room stood open. Inside, he caught sight of her, pale, exhausted, but serene, cradling their newborn daughter in her arms. The baby was sleeping, nestled against her mother's chest, her tiny fist curled around Evelyn's necklace. Jonathan froze. This was the moment he was supposed to be part of. But instead of awe and pride, all he felt was the hollow weight of failure. The nurses glanced at him with wary eyes, whispers already forming. One nurse exited the room quietly and made a discreet phone call. Within minutes, the hospital's parking lot would be swarming. The story had leaked. A tabloid in turn had tipped off the press. Cameras were already clicking, headlines already writing themselves. Billionaire real estate tycoon caught vacationing with mistress while wife delivers baby alone. Social media exploded. Twitter threads, Instagram gossip reels, TikTok reactions, it all happened in a storm of public fury. Jonathan's face, once associated with wealth and success, was now plastered on every major news outlet with damning captions. Luxury yacht. Secret getaway. Wife abandoned. The contrast was too outrageous to ignore. Inside the room, Evelyn didn't even look up when he entered. Her body remained still, but her silence screamed volumes. He opened his mouth to speak, to explain, to apologize, but nothing came out that felt adequate. "She's beautiful," he finally said, voice cracking. Evelyn looked down at the baby, brushing her fingers gently across the infant's cheek. "She is," she replied softly. "Not thank you. Now we're okay." Just a quiet acknowledgement that this child, this miracle, had arrived without him. The pain in her voice was restrained, dignified, but lethal. Jonathan took another step forward, then stopped. The emotional chasm between them was no longer something he could bridge with flowers or words. He had missed more than the birth, he had missed the moment Evelyn stopped needing him. Meanwhile, back in the French villa, Cassandra stared at her phone in horror. Photos of Jonathan boarding the jet. Headlines about Evelyn's emergency labor. A snapshot of the baby in her mother's arms. Her stomach twisted. She had known this day would come, but not like this, not with the world watching, not with her name mentioned as the mistress in Monaco. The messages poured in from fashion peers, distant friends, and reporters looking for a quote. She felt the foundation of her carefully curated image crumble. It wasn't just a scandal, it was a reckoning. She threw her phone across the room and watched it shatter, feeling something break inside her too. Back in London, Jonathan scrambled to control the damage. His PR team released a sterile statement about a misunderstanding of timing and deep regret. He made a large donation to the hospital's maternity wing. He asked Evelyn for a second chance, publicly and privately. But she remained guarded. The media circus swirled around them, dissecting every move, every expression, every photo. Jonathan, once the darling of international business, was now the cautionary tale of selfishness and betrayal. He stood before the woman he once claimed to love and the daughter he barely met on time, not as a proud father or loyal husband, but as a man exposed. And the world was watching. The news of Evelyn giving birth alone while Jonathan was away with his mistress sent shockwaves through both families, stirring a storm of emotions and divided loyalties. Evelyn's closest relatives, though few, rallied around her with fierce protectiveness. Her sister, Claire, flew in immediately from New York, determined to be a steady presence for Evelyn and the newborn. Claire's voice was sharp and unwavering when she confronted Jonathan on the phone, demanding explanations and accountability. To her, Evelyn was the innocent party, abandoned and betrayed at the most vulnerable moment of her life. Her family's sympathy was unwavering, their support absolute. Jonathan's family, however, painted a different picture. His mother, Lady Whitmore, who had long disapproved of Evelyn, regarded the scandal as a regrettable but somewhat predictable chapter in Jonathan's tumultuous life. Some whispered that Evelyn had grown distant, that she had changed since becoming pregnant, and that Jonathan's frustrations were understandable. A few of his siblings tried to mediate, urging both sides to reconcile quietly for the sake of the family's public image. But beneath the polite veneer, many felt torn. They loved Jonathan but couldn't ignore the heartache etched on Evelyn's face. The family dinners became strained affairs, filled with sidelong glances and half-spoken grievances. Friends, too, were split. Some of Jonathan's business associates expressed disappointment yet maintained loyalty, emphasizing his immense contributions and suggesting that the pressures he faced were overwhelming. On the other hand, Evelyn's social circle grew fiercely protective, sending her flowers, gifts, and heartfelt messages. They praised her strength and resilience, sharing stories of women who had overcome similar betrayals. In private chats and social media, factions formed, some condemning Jonathan outright, others calling for understanding and forgiveness. The emotional toll weighed heavily on everyone involved. Evelyn, exhausted from childbirth and the betrayal, found herself navigating not only physical recovery but also the deep wounds left by abandonment. Nights were filled with restless sleep, haunted by memories and fears about the future. Jonathan wrestled with guilt and shame, battling his own demons as the public backlash intensified. The mistress, Cassandra, isolated and attacked by the media, faced her own spiral of anxiety and regret. Recognizing the escalating tensions, close friends and family suggested professional help. A counselor was brought in to facilitate conversations between Evelyn and Jonathan, hoping to uncover whether reconciliation was possible or if separation was inevitable. The sessions were intense, often emotionally raw, exposing long-buried resentments and fears. Evelyn voiced feelings of loneliness and betrayal, while Jonathan struggled to express remorse without defensiveness. The process was slow and painful, but it became clear that healing, whether together or apart, would require honesty and courage from both. Through this turbulent time, one thing remained certain: the birth of their daughter had forever altered the dynamics of family and friendship. Some bonds strengthened in loyalty and love, while others cracked under the strain of scandal and heartbreak. No one involved would ever be the same again. In the quiet moments after the hospital chaos had settled, Evelyn found herself alone with her thoughts, the newborn's soft breathing a steady rhythm against the tumult inside her. The experience of giving birth without Jonathan by her side had shaken something loose within her, a mixture of pain, betrayal, but also an unexpected wellspring of strength. She replayed the memories of their marriage, tracing the arc from passionate beginnings to the cold distance that had crept in like a shadow she refused to acknowledge until now. For years, Evelyn had defined herself by Jonathan's success, his world, and the life they were supposed to build together. But the truth was undeniable: she was more than a wife to a billionaire. She was her own person, intelligent, resilient, and capable. The decision that lay ahead felt monumental. Should she stay and fight for the marriage, try to rekindle the love that had flickered and faded? Could Jonathan change, or was this betrayal a final, irrevocable fracture? Or should she walk away entirely, forging a new path for herself and her daughter, free from the shadow of a man who had abandoned her when she needed him most? Evelyn weighed the options with the precision she applied to every major choice in her life. She thought about the years spent in luxury but loneliness, the promises made and broken, the dreams deferred. Her heart ached, but her mind sharpened. She wasn't willing to settle for half-truths or empty apologies. Empowerment began to take root, not as a grand, dramatic declaration, but as a quiet, steady resolve. Evelyn reached out to trusted friends and mentors, reconnecting with the parts of her life she had neglected. She revisited her love of literature, even enrolling in a creative writing course she had postponed for years. Financially, she consulted with advisors to ensure she and her daughter would be secure, independent of Jonathan's whims. She set up plans for trusts, insurance, and investments in her own name, determined to protect her family's future no matter what unfolded between her and Jonathan. Socially, Evelyn found new rhythms. She wasn't interested in the empty glamour of their old life or the hollow socialites who whispered behind her back. Instead, she built a circle of genuine support, women who had faced their own struggles and emerged stronger. They shared stories, advice, and laughter, reminding Evelyn that she was not alone. She even began volunteering with organizations that supported single mothers and women recovering from betrayal and loss. Giving back became a source of healing and purpose. Her career, once a distant thought, now sparked with possibility. Writing had always been her refuge, a way to process the world. She dreamed of publishing a memoir, not just about heartbreak, but about resilience, self-discovery, and hope. Perhaps her story could inspire others who felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control. She imagined signing books, speaking at events, and carving out a legacy that was entirely hers. Despite the strength she was gathering, the future remained uncertain. Jonathan had expressed remorse and a desire to reconcile, but Evelyn knew healing wouldn't come easily, or perhaps at all. Trust, once broken, is not easily mended. She resolved to put her daughter first, to build a home filled with love and stability, whether or not Jonathan was part of it. The child was her anchor, her motivation, and her joy. In the end, Evelyn stood at a crossroads. The path back to Jonathan's arms was tempting but fraught with risk. The road forward alone promised challenges but also freedom. She had no definitive answers yet, only the fierce knowledge that whatever choice she made would be hers, and hers alone. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The scandal that rocked the Whitmore family spread like wildfire, and Cassandra Lee quickly found herself at the eye of the storm. What had once been a secret whispered behind closed doors erupted into relentless headlines and social media tirades. Overnight, Cassandra went from being the glamorous, untouchable mistress basking in the billionaire's attention to a public pariah vilified for her role in the betrayal. Fashion brands she once collaborated with began distancing themselves, influencers unfollowed her, and even some of her closest acquaintances offered cold shoulders. The spotlight was no longer flattering, it was harsh and unforgiving. Jonathan's hurried departure from the villa to rush back to Evelyn's side left Cassandra feeling abandoned and exposed. For all her confidence, she hadn't anticipated the fragility of her position once the public's gaze sharpened. The lavish gifts, whispered promises, and luxurious nights suddenly felt hollow. Without Jonathan's presence, her carefully constructed world began to crumble. In the days following the scandal, Cassandra wrestled with a cocktail of emotions: anger, humiliation, jealousy, and a creeping sense of loss. The power she once thought she held over Jonathan slipped through her fingers like sand. Yet, amidst the chaos, a sliver of clarity began to emerge. She realized that her identity had been entangled so deeply with Jonathan's that she had lost sight of who she truly was. The ambition that fueled her had been driven, in part, by the desire to replace Evelyn, to claim a life she'd only glimpsed from the outside. But the cost was higher than she had ever imagined. The glamour, the thrill, the fleeting moments of dominance, they all paled in comparison to the loneliness she now felt. Public scorn was harsh, but the private reckoning was harsher. Cassandra considered fighting back, using her social media platforms to control the narrative, to paint herself as the victim or the misunderstood woman. But every message drafted felt insincere, and every interview request was met with growing exhaustion. Instead, she chose to retreat. She deleted several accounts, canceled upcoming appearances, and took a step back from the world that had both elevated and destroyed her. This exit wasn't defeat but a necessary pause for reflection and healing. In solitude, Cassandra confronted her own motivations and mistakes. She sought therapy, something she had scoffed at before, and began untangling the web of her desires, fears, and insecurities. There were moments of raw honesty, acknowledging the pain she had caused, not only to Evelyn but also to herself. The fantasy of being the leading lady in Jonathan's life was just that, a fantasy. Reality was far more complex and often cruel. While some saw her as a villain, Cassandra slowly transformed her narrative from one of scandal to one of growth. She started writing, channeling her experiences into essays and articles about ambition, love, and self-worth. The public, ever hungry for redemption arcs, began to soften their view as she shared her vulnerabilities and lessons learned. Though the billionaire had retreated to repair his marriage, Cassandra carved out her own path, no longer in his shadow but standing on her own, complicated and authentic. Her downfall had been spectacular, but her redemption was quieter, slower, and far more meaningful. It was a rebirth not granted by society or Jonathan, but forged through self-awareness and courage. And for the first time, Cassandra wasn't chasing someone else's life, she was beginning to live her own. Jonathan Whitmore's journey from reckless indulgence to genuine responsibility was neither swift nor easy. The initial shock of Evelyn's labor alone and the public scandal forced him into a reckoning he had long avoided. Gone were the days when his charm and wealth could smooth over any mistake. Now, he faced the profound consequences of his actions, not just in headlines, but in the hollow spaces of his own life. The empty nights in his vast home echoed with regret, and every reflection in the mirror reminded him of the man he had become versus the man he aspired to be. His first attempts at apology were clumsy and inadequate. Messages sent too late, calls missed, flowers left unopened. Evelyn's silence was louder than any rejection. But Jonathan persisted, slowly learning that trust wasn't something to demand, it was earned, painstakingly and consistently. He sought counseling, not just for the sake of public image, but because he genuinely wanted to understand the fractures within himself and his marriage. In sessions with a skilled therapist, he confronted uncomfortable truths about his fears, selfishness, and the ways he had neglected Evelyn emotionally long before the affair. These insights, painful as they were, sparked the first genuine changes in him. Rebuilding respect and love was a daily, often frustrating process. Evelyn's guarded heart required patience and humility, qualities Jonathan had to cultivate in ways he never had before. He began volunteering at local charities she supported, not as a grand gesture, but as a sign of commitment to values she held dear. He attended parenting classes, learning not just about the baby but about the responsibilities of being a father present in both name and deed. His social calendar emptied as he prioritized family time, choosing quiet dinners over extravagant galas. Each step forward was met with both hope and skepticism. The challenges were many. Friends questioned his resolve, the media remained unforgiving, and sometimes, Jonathan questioned himself. Was he trying to salvage his reputation or truly mend the bonds he'd broken? The line blurred, but he remained focused on growth rather than shortcuts. His relationship with Cassandra ended quietly, no public drama, just an unspoken understanding that his future no longer included her. The Mistress was a chapter closed, a lesson learned. Jonathan's priorities shifted profoundly. Success was no longer measured solely by wealth or influence but by the depth of connection he could rebuild with Evelyn and their daughter. He sought balance, striving to be a partner, a father, and a man of integrity. His business decisions became more thoughtful, often reflecting a desire to create lasting, positive impact rather than quick profits. Evelyn's presence became a compass, guiding him through the complexity of healing. Yet, beneath the progress, an unspoken tension lingered, a final choice awaited. Could Evelyn forgive fully? Could trust be restored to the point where they could rebuild their marriage, or had the fracture become too great? Jonathan faced moments of despair, realizing that love alone might not be enough. The Mistress had symbolized his escape, but now, the escape was gone. The future lay before him uncertain and raw. He was no longer the carefree billionaire who vanished when things got hard. He was a man learning to stand firm in vulnerability, hoping that in time, love and commitment could truly be his redemption. Years later, the Whitmore estate had softened from the sharp edges of scandal to a quieter, more reflective home. Evelyn had embraced her role as a mother with fierce dedication, her daughter's laughter filling the once empty halls with warmth and light. Whether she stood alone or alongside Jonathan had become less about labels and more about what truly mattered, their child's happiness and well-being. In public, Evelyn was now recognized not just as a billionaire's wife but as a woman who had reclaimed her identity on her own terms. She had published her memoir, a candid exploration of love, betrayal, and resilience, inspiring countless others facing their own battles. Jonathan's journey took him far from the reckless lifestyle of his past. The man who once fled responsibility had transformed, dedicating himself to fatherhood and personal growth. Though his relationship with Evelyn remained complicated, sometimes distant, sometimes hopeful, he had found peace in becoming a better man, regardless of the outcome. Whether forgiveness was fully granted or not, Jonathan carried the lessons of his mistakes as a guiding force, a reminder that true success is measured by character, not fortune. The scandal that once threatened to destroy them became a defining chapter in their lives, a story of broken trust and shattered illusions, but also of healing and unexpected hope. It showed that even in the darkest moments, strength could emerge. Forgiveness was not always about reconciliation but about releasing the weight of pain. And hope, fragile and stubborn, could light the way toward new beginnings. In the end, their story was not just about betrayal or heartbreak, it was about the power of choice. Evelyn chose herself, Jonathan chose growth, and their daughter became the symbol of a future shaped by courage and love. Life after the storm was not perfect, but it was real, honest, and full of possibility. And sometimes, that is enough.